Welcome back to Kevin Wilson SBC. I'm excited to get going with part 3, no prep suspension, and today I want to focus primarily on the 4-link suspension. I run into 4-link tremendously in my efforts between 4-link and probably leaf springs and cow tracks, or leaf springs and ladder bars, the top 3 suspensions I come across for the rear end of most drag cars I work with. Thank you for your support of the channel. Please remember to subscribe to the channel. Let's get started. Let's talk about no prep 4-link suspension. When it comes to no prep rear end setup, chassis setup, suspension setup, I want to be clear, there is no magic answer. You have to study your car, you have to look at video, you have to have people getting different angles, and you have to make decisions based on what your car is doing. Let's settle this once and for all. In the no prep scene, I'm not going to be trying to get a radial tire to hook in a no prep scene. If you want to run radial in a no prep scene, good luck. You really need to be running a drag slick. Today I'm primarily talking about a small tire, and a lot of this applies to big tire, but I'm primarily talking about a small tire drag slick rear end setup. With the bars at your disposal, and this is going to go for triangulated or non-triangulated 4-link, let's talk about the bottom bar first. This is a very rough drawing. This is not to scale. Here's the rear end, here's your brackets on the rear, here's your chassis 4-link brackets, here's the intersect point, and let's just assume for the sake of this example, this is the height of my center of gravity. Now, it's not to scale, so the center of gravity would be over here off of the chalkboard in this scenario, but I just kind of wanted to reference the height of the center of gravity. That's important. We're going to hit on that here in a little bit. I want to focus on the bottom bar first. In a 4-link, I think it's pretty well understood that when you hit the gas and you launch a car, the rear end in the car is trying to twist up. It's trying to twist up and drive forward. So it's got a twist and a drive forward motion to it. This bottom bar is pushing on the chassis. The top bar is pulling on the chassis. So the top bar is pulling, the bottom bar is pushing. And how these two react to each other and work together is a very big part of the 4-link suspension. On the bottom bar, when I'm talking no prep, I'm generally going to want the bottom bar as low down on the rear end bracket as I can get, and I want it as low in the chassis bracket as I can get, with the bottom bar staying level or slightly uphill from the rear end to the chassis. I don't want the bottom bar digging down from the rear end to the chassis. I'm trying to put all the energy at work to pushing the chassis on a place on the chassis underneath the center of gravity. I don't want the push point to be up too high on a no prep car. I want it down low. Now let's talk about this a little bit more. If you are having trouble with a no prep car and you are constantly fighting wheelies with your no prep car, which is a great problem to have, if you can have a car that's wheeling in a no prep scene, kudos to you. That's a great problem to have because you've got a lot of great weight transfer. However, if you bring the bottom bar mount point up and keep the bar level, then you are raising the push point on the chassis. And the higher up your push point comes to here, to the center of gravity, the more you're pushing on the center of gravity and not picking up the center of gravity. Many videos ago, I talked about the example that is on the baseline suspension page, where he uses the example of pushing a refrigerator across the floor. And there's a sweet spot on that refrigerator where if you push it, it pushes the refrigerator forward. If you push too low, you're trying to push the bottom and you got so much weight on top, the top wants to tilt back towards you. You're pushing the bottom and tilting the top. If you push too high on the refrigerator, you're going to push the refrigerator over and push the front end down. I'm really trying to simulate if you were to hang your car on the center of gravity point on your car. If you were to pick your car off the ground and hang it by a chain, fully weighted, then the car should balance pretty much fully level. If you have a car hanging from the center of gravity, now this is all hypothetical, please don't go attempt to do this, but if you had your race car hanging from the center of gravity and you begin to push on the chassis underneath the center of gravity, simulating this twist and roll forward, that twist and roll is going to pick the front end of the car up and bring the rear end of the car towards the ground. If you push directly on the center of gravity, the car is just going to push forward. The front end is neither going to come up or down. All your momentum is pushing the car forward. If you push above the center of gravity, you're going to push the front end down and bring the rear end up. The interesting point of this lower bar in no prep is I'm trying to bring the front end of the car up for weight transfer. But here again, this is where balance is so important. You have to balance this scenario with your car. If you're pushing too low and you're getting way too much weight transfer and you're killing the rear end or killing your slicks, you may have to change the bottom bar level some. But in no prep, generally, I want the bottom bar as low on the rear end as I can go and level or just a little bit of an uphill rise towards the chassis on the chassis mount. Okay, if you're running a 4-link rear suspension, most of us understand this intersect point right here is the instant center. The IC, this is the center of gravity, height. And remember, this is not to scale. Please remember that. But all of us understand the imaginary line where these two bars meet is called the instant center. And I can influence the height of the instant center with this bottom bar. I'm going to influence the length of the instant center with my top bar. Primarily, I can influence the length with the bottom bar. If I were to bring this bottom bar up to this hole, then I would influence the length because my intercept point would be here instead of here. I'm talking no prep now. Generally, like we just said, bottom bar level and low on the chassis. My top bar, now this is the bar that is trying to pull the chassis while we push the chassis. So on the twist, this top bar is primarily where I'm going to get my bite. And on a no prep car, you're pretty much setting up the top bar with a radial type setup. I am not going to have rear end squat. I'm not trying to have an intersect point way below the neutral line or the anti-squat line. I'm not trying to have that. And let me just pause for a minute. You can have an intersect point somewhat below the neutral line and still have rear end separation. Until you start getting out to mid 50s or 60s or longer instant centers, I don't care if you're below the anti-squat line, if you have a good amount of downward rake on your top bar towards the chassis and your instant center is pretty far behind the center of gravity, then the car is going to have separation to some degree. The important thing to understand is in no prep racing, we are trying to shove the tire to the surface. Wheel speed is not our friend in no prep racing. And once you start developing wheel speed in no prep racing, unless you have some type of traction control in place, generally your RPMs are going to continue to rise and you're going to begin to haze the tires. And when you start hazing the tires or smoking the tires, you're spinning, you're not putting your power to the track, you're losing. So with the top bar, I'm really trying to mimic a radial type setup, and generally I'm going to have a good bit of downward rake. If you can, and you're having issues with initial bite and then you start to haze the tires more out from the 60 foot, you might want to try to add more top bar angle down. As you separate and this bar and the rear end is separating and the chassis is going up, the minute this bar begins to level out, then your bite is stopping about there. So with the top bar, I'm looking for some good downward angle, and I'm shooting for probably in the 35 to 44 instant center length range. It depends on your car. It's generally going to be a pretty short instant center in no prep racing. With that in mind, it is very important that we understand the role the shocks play in this 4-link no prep setup. If we have a good bit of top bar rake in the car, and I know I'm going to be separating, and I know as I go down the track, I'm going to continue to separate, I got to have shock valving that can help not top the shock out too quick. And I got to have shock compression valving as I separate, and I want to keep the separation in place as I make my run. I got to have enough compression valving to keep the slick on the track and not allow the slick to just come back and compress the shock too quickly. With that in mind, let's make sure we cover 4-link setup and shock setup. When it comes to how do you have your shocks installed and how do you have your shocks set, in no prep racing, I'm going to be looking for more extension travel and less compression travel. So when I install the shock in my no prep race car, let's say I have a shock that has 6 inches of travel, complete travel. So if the shock is fully collapsed and you fully extend it, let's say that's 6 inches. I'm going to have 1.5 inches of available compression, and I'm going to dedicate the rest of it to extension travel. Now I'm talking in general terms here. The point I'm trying to make is I'm going to have the shock installed at ride height, fully race ready with driver. I want both shocks to be around 1.5 inches worth of compression. So I want about 1 inch to 1.5 inches of the shock extended. I want the rest of the shock extension left for me to tune and valve for rear end separation. I do see guys who are running some very good bar angles, and they have great 4-link setup, but they have less than 1 inch of extension travel left. And what's happening is, as you hit this rear end and you begin to bring power in, if your shock extends and it has no more extension to go, you've what we call top the shock out. You have no more ability to control the rear end and plant the tire. You're immediately going to compress the shock. When it hits full extension, you're immediately going to upset the rear end and go into tire spin. So you can have all of the right 4-link bar setups, but the wrong shock installation or the wrong shock valving. We're going to get to that. But here again, I want the shock installed with more extension travel and less compression travel. I have to have some compression travel in the shock, or the rear end's not going to be safe. You can't have the shock at one extreme or the other. I would rather you split the difference. I would rather you have the shock installed at half extension before you took away all compression. If you can, in no prep, give me more extension travel and a little less compression travel. Shock valving. All right, here we go. These knobs again, and these compression and rebound settings where everyone really believes the magic happens. But I'm just telling you, the compression and rebound settings is just one more piece of the recipe. You can have the greatest valving in the world and have the wrong bar angles. It's not going to work. You can have the greatest valving in the world, have the shocks installed wrong. It's not going to work. You can have all of this perfect and try to run a radial tire in no prep and keep spinning. It's not going to work. It's all about the combination. When it comes to compression and rebound on the shocks, the magic answer is I want the shock to control the extension and allow the shock to slowly extend through the first 100 foot of the track, and I don't want the shock topping out too quickly before the finish line. I want enough compression valving to, as the shock separates and the slick is trying to push back up and compress the shock, I want enough compression valving to hold the slick to the track without killing the sidewall and distorting the sidewall. If you look at the tracks of your car after the run and you notice that the prints are wobbling in and out, or just kind of sewing in and out, then that's a sign of you need to add some air pressure, and you may need to slow down or take some of the bite out of the car. Now, we can talk air pressure all day long. One car may respond to 8 pounds, another car may respond to 12 pounds. You're going to have to figure out a starting spot based on how your car is reacting, but I can't just give you a magic air pressure value. We have to see what your car is doing and understand how your car is reacting. So once you get the shock installed height, if you don't know where to start with your shocks, then I'm going to tell you, let's go middle ways. Let's start off with middle of the road rebound and middle of the road compression valving, and let's see what happens. Ideally, you have a set of shocks that you understand where the dyno graph is falling based on the clicks. With 4-link, no prep, I'm looking to allow a little faster extension than I would on a prep track, and I'm going to add a little more compression than I would on a prep track to keep the slick planted to the ground. So here again, there's no magic answer on compression and rebound. I'm trying to give you the general consensus of what's happening here with the 4-link and the shocks and things that are happening. If you had to tell me, or you wanted me to tell you which slick would you start off with, I'm going to start off with either a Hoosier D06 or Phoenix makes a very good slick for no prep as well, especially for asphalt and back of the track. As you get on a better and better surface, if you're no prepping on the front of the track and it's starting to really come around, or it's going to be getting pretty sticky, I'm a Mickey Thompson guy. I like Mickey Thompson slicks and more of the heavier prepped, no prep scenes. If it's truly street, truly no prep, back of the track, asphalt, I'm going to be looking at a Hoosier D06 or the Phoenix. Phoenix actually has a very nice write-up. I'll put it in the description on the Coker webpage about their tires, their slicks for no prep. And you can go read it and form your own opinion. But that's where I'm going to be. If I have a car that's in the 3,000 to 2,800 to 3,000 range, I'm probably going to start off with my slicks around 10 pounds of pressure, 10 to 11. I may wind up at 8. I may wind up at 12. But if I'm going to go out cold turkey and start, I'm going to probably start around 10 pounds of air pressure and see what's going on. Watch my video and make adjustments from there. 4-link is not some mysterious thing to figure out. Once you understand what the bars are doing and how they interact with each other, then if you can follow these principles with your 4-link setup and get a baseline and get your instant center probably around mid-30s in the low 40s, and that's short now, but it's going to be a lower instant center for my no prep cars. That's where I'm going to start because I'm looking for weight transfer. If I start having problems with wheelies, I'm going to move the bottom bar push point up in the chassis. I'm going to try not to compromise my top bar angle because I'm still wanting to create separation, but I may raise my instant center some to bring the front end down. And you can do that. You can leave the same top bar angle and you can move this bar up. I would move it up on the rear end and the chassis and get my push point a little higher to try to keep the front end down. We've already talked about front end, but these bar angles will and can impact your front end, obviously, and how much weight transfer you have going on and how it impacts wheeling. Let's touch on coil springs real quick for the rear end. Coil springs are an important part of the recipe. And for no prep, I'm going to be looking for a little softer coil spring than I would look for in a fully prepped 4-link rear suspension. Here again, it's about utilizing the stored energy in a coil spring to help with weight transfer and help with rear separation. If I normally run a 150-pound coil spring in the 48 Ford and I'm going to go no prepping, I'm probably going to drop down to 130 or 120 pound spring, collapse the coil spring a little bit more on installed height, but not close to coil bind because I still want to have some weight transfer. And we got to be careful because in no prep, we are bringing the front end up a good bit, trying to move weight to the rear. And those coil springs are helping with the weight transfer or resisting weight transfer if they're too stiff. So we gotta work with the recipe here and get the balance right. But on my rear coil springs, I'm going to be shooting for probably 50% compression on the rear coil spring so that I have more ability to help extend the shock. And I'm going to be using my compression valving to help with controlling how much weight is transferred and how hard I'm keeping the slick planted. So don't forget about the coil spring on the rear of the car. It needs to support the weight of the car, but I'm looking for a little bit more coil spring compression in my no prep setup versus my full prep setup for 4-link. I hope this makes sense. I'm trying not to be so wordy. I had a lot of people tell me you really need to talk less. You're repeating yourself. But guys, I don't know a better way to teach this. Repetition and talking about how all these pieces fit together is absolutely critical. I appreciate the support of the channel. I know there's going to be more people wanting to hear more about no prep with leaf springs, no prep with ladder bars, no prep with you name it, independent rear suspension, you name it. I could do videos all day long on the different types of suspensions, but 4-link is by far the most sought after request I get in comments and emails and things like that. Hey, absolutely, leaf springs and cow tracks absolutely work. I'm not looking for a lot of leaf spring stiffness. I want to get the leaf spring as flexible as possible, support the weight of the car safely, but I'm not looking for a lot of leaf spring stiffness. You're probably going to have to remove some helper springs. I'm a huge fan of the mono leaf setup. We've ran them very successfully with cow tracks, and they just absolutely work. I've told you, you know, you can go look at Billy the Kid on the Street Racing channel. The cow track system absolutely works. Ladder bars are a little more tricky with no prep because you only get to move the front mount point, and that can be a tricky scenario. But generally in no prep racing, if you move the ladder bar chassis mount up in the chassis, you're adding bite. So, but you're also, as you go up, you're also limiting some weight transfer. So it's a balancing act with that. I hope the 4-link video made sense. I hope this helped you more. I don't think I've repeated anything that's any different than some of my other videos. It's just I've focused it more on a no prep setup. Thank you for supporting the channel. Thank you for how you guys reach out and interact with me and Dad. I am so appreciative of all of the subscribers. We've recently just passed 10,000 subscribers, and I am thrilled to death. Dad is just amazed at the technology that's available on the internet, and he is just thrilled watching the growth of the channel that we've had here. So thank you all for all of your support. And please remember, we're trying to do 3 things. We're trying to go fast, we're trying to go straight, and we're trying to be safe.